Karl, how are you, my friend?
Very good. Thanks, Chris.
Oh, it's great to be here. So I'm excited about this. Just so you know, Karl, I promised EcoMotion this would be the best fireside chat they've ever had. So no pressure as
Okay.
we jump in.
All right.
Um, so I'm really excited to have the opportunity, given that in many ways we've come up together in the mobility space over the last decade. Serving on the Nutonomy board, creating tremendous value, working on initiatives together. But I want to start by actually putting Nutonomy and Motional aside for a moment. And we're going to circle back to both. The predominant amount of this interview will be focused on that. But I'd like for you to give a brief background of your personal journey. And I want to preface it with this. So in 1520, Robert Whittington, a contemporary of Sir Thomas More, he wrote that More was a man of angel's wit and singular learning. I know not his fellow, from where is a man of that gentleness, loneliness, and affability, and as time requireth, a man of marvelous mirth and pastimes, and sometimes of sad gravity, a man for all seasons. So you're truly a unique guy, a contemporary man of all seasons, which I'd offer is even more difficult in this day and age. So talk about your path.
Well, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I didn't think we'd start this fireside with a 16th century quote, but I'm glad we did. My path has been a little bit winding to get to the driverless industry. I started my career in the academic world. I went to MIT in 1995, thinking I would get a master's degree and then leave and go into industry. Instead, I stayed there for almost 15 years. I was doing research in robotics. I founded a research lab called the Robotic Mobility Group to do research in mobile robotics. And those ended up being robots that happened to have four wheels that would drive around the laboratory floor, that would occasionally bump into walls and other things. And sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't work too well. But over time, those robots, they grew in scale and sophistication. And the technology that we were researching at MIT, that ended up being some of the foundational technology for driverless vehicles and driver assistance systems. And so there reached a point where I started to look at these systems that were running around the laboratory floor. And if you squinted at it, you could see that someday, this rudimentary technology could become a viable commercial product. And the implications of that, as you well know, Chris, are tremendous, not only from a health and safety perspective, but from an economic perspective. So formed Nutonomy in 2013 to begin the path to commercializing this technology. That was with a fellow colleague at MIT, Emilio Frazzoli. Nutonomy led us to Aptiv, an acquisition in 2017, and Aptiv led us to the formation of Motional about a year ago. So that's a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of how I got here.
That's perfect. And that's actually a great segue to the partners and people that comprise Motional. And I think some of the things you kind of glossed over there as an author, as someone who's been involved in a variety of different things over the course of your academic and personal career. Again, I think it's given you such a unique perspective, not just all tech, not just all kind of focusing from business model perspective, but really bringing these disparate kind of pieces of knowledge to bear. But talk about what I believe is one of, if not the most, kind of remarkable team in autonomy today with Motional and what you're doing there and what you're excited about.
Yeah, well, Motional's mission, I'll start with that. Our mission at Motional is to make driverless vehicles a safe, reliable, and accessible reality, and ultimately change the way the world moves. So we're building level 4 driverless systems. I mentioned we're a new business. We just celebrated our first birthday, but we're really new in name only. That journey that I just described, I've been building a team since really 2013. So starting in Nutonomy, we grew that business to about 130 people. We joined Aptiv, which was a great move for us, gave us access to all of these fantastic resources and people within Aptiv. I grew my team within Aptiv there to about 600 plus individuals. And then when we formed Motional, we've been in significant growth mode. We're now 1,100 plus engineers and business people, primarily in North America, but also with a strong presence in Asia, Singapore, and Seoul.
So talk a little bit about Singapore. And I think you guys have such a unique global footprint as well as the attributes, why you built in certain places, what uniquely positions Motional globally with these really interesting pools of talent, and I think ways in which you're utilizing testing and data on-road activity.
Yeah, well, I'll give you a little bit of history. It really started from a talent perspective. We knew there was a great talent pool in Singapore. My co-founder of Nutanix, Emilio, had a presence and a laboratory in Singapore. We also knew that the Singapore government wanted autonomous vehicles on their streets. And, this is not a given, even in today's society, that every government around the world is not only accepting, but welcoming of autonomous technology. When I look forward in time, Chris, and I think about our path to market and path to scaling, there are the things that we can control: technology, the user experience, the rider experience. Then there are things that are to some degree less within our control, and that is public acceptance. So we want to ensure that we had a path to market in a geography that was likely to want to have driverless vehicles on their streets, and that is Singapore. That's a great description of Singapore. So very happy with our partnership there. I'll make one other point. One of the things that we want to ensure is that we're building a technology that has the capability to scale globally. This is no longer a question of, does the technology work? There are driverless vehicles picking up and dropping off people in cities around the world every day, and that includes motional driverless vehicles. The question now, and the point of discussion now, is how do we scale and how quickly can we scale? And one of the ways that we gain confidence at Motional in our ability to scale is ensuring that we're testing on a regular basis in a variety of very diverse environments. So everywhere from Boston to Pittsburgh to Las Vegas to Singapore, those are all radically different driving environments. That's how you gain confidence that you're building technology that's not going to be just ultimately localized to a particular town or a particular kind of sleepy suburban environment.
And I think what I love about that description is you're talking about these dynamic ecosystems, very different attributes, but you're looking for, we talk a lot at Assembly about the necessity of kind of building that flywheel, that virtuous cycle around talent creation, around startups, around engaging with large corporates that want to actually engage with that entrepreneurial ecosystem, but also really have an opportunity to bring capital to bear. So that's a great segue. Talk about the current state of autonomy. I couldn't agree more. I think we're very early days, but you make the point around it's the right partners, it's the public acceptance, it's the necessity of actually being able to get great data. I look at Las Vegas and what you've done there, for example, and I think that's just a really interesting initial kind of deployment.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing, the number of players in the driverless space get smaller, but get stronger. All right. So there's been some consolidation, but the remaining players are strong players. And in my opinion, you really need three key ingredients to be a credible player today in the driverless space. Number one, you need great technology. And we feel very good about where we are from a technical perspective. I mentioned a moment ago, we are demonstrating driverless vehicles, meaning we've got enough confidence in our tech that we've taken the step of removing the safety driver behind the wheel and done fully driverless testing. And that's a big step, puts us in a very select group of companies that's taken that leap. So you got to have the technology. Number two, you've got to have the hardware capability, the integration with the vehicle. And that, I think that was one of these areas that was a bit underappreciated in the industry for some time. But ultimately, you need to have the capability to integrate your technology with a vehicle system and have it come off an assembly line in a manner that's very robust, very reliable, and very cost optimized. And the way you achieve that, Chris, is by working shoulder to shoulder with an OEM. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what we're doing at Motional. We've got a strong relationship with Hyundai, as you can well imagine. They're one of our key stakeholders. And our engineering team spend countless hours engineering our first product so that the Motional technology will be closely integrated with the Hyundai vehicle. And then those three ingredients, you need access to resources. This is not an inexpensive place to play. We are 1,100 headcount strong, as I mentioned. We've got access to over $1 billion in capital. Again, that puts us in a very kind of elite group of players who can say that. But that's really what it takes to fund the activity at the scale that's necessary to get to market and get to scale.
So talk about that first vehicle, this next generation robotaxi. I'm a Detroit guy, as you know, but it's a sexy vehicle. It looks great, incredible performance on any metric. Is it a Tesla killer? And what do you care about when it comes to the service you're providing in the marketplace?
Yeah, well, it's a great vehicle. We announced fairly recently that our first product will be based on the Hyundai Ioniq 5, which is a battery electric vehicle that I can say is, getting rapt reception from the market. It's not only a fantastic looking vehicle, it's based on a new vehicle platform that has all the performance characteristics that we are looking for. And, the point I made a moment ago is really very important. It's not the case that you can take a base vehicle, however desirable its characteristics are, you can't take a base vehicle and assume you can just retrofit sensors, retrofit compute, electrical system, and achieve the level of reliability and cost optimization that's required to win in the market. Instead, that vehicle will have to come off an assembly line with that automotive grade quality that comes with that assembly line process. So that's what we're working on today. From a form factor perspective, we're confident that the Ioniq 5 is going to be a great first product for us. 80% plus ride-hail trips are for 2 passengers or fewer. Ultimately, we want to put a product in the market that's going to service what the market wants, that's going to meet our customers' demand. And so we know that the Ioniq 5 with Motional technology is going to do exactly that.
So you've talked a lot about the amazing team you've built. You've talked a lot about the remarkable form factor in terms of the hardware and the vehicle you're going to be utilizing. Let's focus on the customer for a minute. What are some of the interesting things that you guys have learned in the market so far about what the customer wants, what it doesn't want, and how are you utilizing that data uniquely as you're deploying both in your current cities and in new cities?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, especially in light of COVID, when COVID hit, It was such a reset in so many ways. It was not clear to me what that impact of COVID would be on driverless and on the public view of driverless more specifically. My suspicion was that it would increase consumer appetite for driverless technology. But we went out and we asked people, we did a survey, we surveyed over 1,000 people. What we found was interesting, nearly 1 in 5 people that we surveyed were more interested in driverless technology when we spoke to them than they were pre-pandemic. And it was something like 62% of the people we talked to believed that driverless was the way of the future. And that told me that customers, they really acknowledge the value of a contactless free trip, a trip where they have control over the environment that they're in, and they're not sharing space, with a stranger who may have picked up 20 other people that day. So I think the appetite for driverless is only increasing. What we found now, not from a survey, but through our own hands-on experience in Las Vegas, we've been operating a pilot service with Lyft. It's a commercial revenue generating service on the Lyft network. If you go to Las Vegas, you can potentially hail a Motional powered driverless vehicle. We've given over 100,000 rides to date. And a lot of those people are first-time riders. Not all of them, of course, but a lot of them are. What we found is that the types of concerns people have are much less about the technology than maybe myself as a technologist would have thought. It's about the ride experience, full stop. We get some feedback about, there's not enough leg room here in the back. There wasn't enough trunk space for my luggage, that kind of stuff. But now the reason I think people are less focused on the technology is because we have worked incredibly hard to deliver a ride, an autonomous ride, that's very, very much like a human piloted ride. So that involves the comfort of the ride and the feeling of safety that the technology imparts. If you can do all that, then people will focus on other things and they'll accept the driverless technology. The good news is that 98% of the trips we've given have been 5 stars out of 5. So I think we're off to a great start, but we continue to learn from that activity in Vegas and then feedback that knowledge into our product development process.
So focusing on this deployment in Vegas, because I think there's so many interesting things you're doing around, looking at this next cycle of innovation. You're already leaning into what needs to happen next to make this viable, and that will be readily deployable globally. This isn't just a bespoke solution for one geo. Talk a little bit about, what do we need to bring to the public sphere, whether it be from a tech stack perspective, a support perspective. I look at the press release you pushed, I believe it was last week with Dirk, kind of focusing on the importance of V2I and how that's going to be a big piece of safety from an intersection to just a variety of other perspectives. But how do you think about that next cycle of innovation?
Yeah, just to touch on that announcement with Dirk, a small business, interesting startup with great technology around V2I sensing and helping us look at intersections through an additional set of eyes, if you will, and make our systems even safer. But to get back to your question, Chris, on what it's going to take to scale and get to that next cycle of innovation, really it's this continuous feedback between user experience, user feedback, and then redefining our product experience. And again, one of our key findings so far has been that it's not sufficient to just have a ride that's safe. Safe is the table stakes. But beyond that, you have to have a ride that makes riders feel safe, if that makes sense. And what that means is you have to have autonomous technology that's smooth, that's comfortable, and drives in a very human-like manner. And so we spend countless hours perfecting exactly that. But to get to that, real scalability, you'll have to have consumer acceptance. You'll have to have governmental acceptance. And so, of course, we're working in various geographies of interest to make sure that the regulatory framework is there for us when we want to enter a market, and that we don't encounter any obstacles from a regulatory perspective.
So last big question, Karl. You talked a little bit earlier about the shakeout that's taken place over the last couple of years, and we've seen the rise and fall of differentiated teams and approaches to autonomy. That's everything from individual transport to long haul logistics to the way this is all consolidating and coming together. Talk a little bit about the importance of tier ones and OEMs to companies and teams like yours around their role and how partnership is going to play a big role, or how you think it may not.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think we tend to focus on we focus on OEMs, we focus on the startup, mystique. But look, the tier ones of the automotive world, what they do, they're really the glue that connects the technology to the vehicle. What do tier ones do is their business? They develop technology, they test and validate technology, they integrate technology. That's their core business. And I would argue that a whole lot of what we're doing as driverless technology developers falls within that tier one purview. And I'll also add, they do that with a real laser focus on cost and cost optimization. Now, today, tier ones have been primarily focused on ADAS systems, but there is a path. I believe there is a path from the ADAS systems of today to the fully driverless systems of tomorrow. And I would argue that, the holy grail here is to develop a safe, reliable driverless system at the cost of a sophisticated driver assistance system. If you can do that, man, you do a couple of very powerful things. Number one, you unlock an opportunity for personally owned vehicles. You can sell that technology in to the ADAS buyers of the world. And number two, for the mobility service, the fully driverless use cases, the robo-taxis, the delivery use cases, you will have potentially a significant cost advantage compared to your competitors who aren't as focused on cost optimization, who are relying on expensive, bespoke components, whether that's sensors, compute, or both. So, that tier one DNA in Motional that comes from Aptiv, that is serving us well. And we focus on this path that I just described. We are aiming to get to a future where we have technology that spans from the ADAS stack all the way up to level 4 and can service additional markets beyond just moving people from A to B.
That's super interesting, and I totally agree. Last question. One thing that we're seeing a lot at Assembly is this current and accelerating, or it seems to be accelerating, bifurcation between the West and the East. And this is as it relates to manufacturing systems, logistics, supply chain. How do you think about this as it relates to autonomy and the use of data and the way in which you're going to deploy into certain markets? What does that dynamic mean to you?
Well, we have a strong presence in Asia, in Singapore, Southeast Asia, and in Seoul. We see those markets as of high interest to us. I think we're fairly unique in the industry as having a strong presence in both North America and Asia. Now, obviously, as you talk about China, that raises some unique questions around requirements for partnerships and access to data. But certainly in parts of Asia, we see a clear path to a very, very significant opportunity. And that's really where our focus is today, Chris. Parts of Asia, North America, these are the markets that have what I consider to be the right ingredients for deployment. Great weather, good driving conditions, a welcoming kind of posture from the regulatory bodies, and a significant mobility market. So that's where our focus is today. Bifurcation, I don't expect in the future that we'll have a fully bifurcated environment. I don't think that will be the case, but certainly I think what you're seeing is teams are growing up in tech centers and are turning their initial focus to maybe, if not their backyard, to environments that they're familiar and comfortable with. So I think it's in part a natural evolution of where a lot of these tech teams have been formed, the companies they've spun out of, et cetera.
No, I totally agree. And I think your point's a really important one. This is kind of the Western world from economic construct. So whether it's Tokyo, Busan, Seoul, Detroit and Stuttgart, if you will, I think that's going to be the big differentiation. Karl, this has been fascinating as always. It's great to see you, my friend. Thanks for the time.
Great talking with you, Chris.